September 2nd, 31 BC, the Ionian Sea, off the coast of Greece. Over 600 warships faced each other in one of the largest naval battles the ancient world had ever seen. On one side, the forces of Octavian Julius Caesar's cold, calculating adopted son, commanding the most disciplined military machine on earth. On the other, the combined fleets of Mark Antony and Cleopatra VII, Queen of Egypt, the most powerful woman alive, commanding the wealth of the Nile and the last great independent kingdom of the Mediterranean. The battle began in the morning. By afternoon, it was over. Cleopatra's flagship broke through the Roman line and fled south toward Egypt. Antony, seeing her go, abandoned his own fleet and followed. His navy, leaderless and outmaneuvered, collapsed. Within a year, both Antony and Cleopatra were dead by their own hands. He from a sword, she most likely from the venom of an asp, having refused to be paraded through Rome in chains. Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor, and the world we inherited was born. But the battle was not the foregone conclusion history makes it seem. At the start of the campaign, Antony commanded a larger and more heavily armed fleet. His ships carried towers, archers, and marines trained for close combat. He had more troops, more territory, and the wealth of Egypt behind him. What destroyed him was not Octavian's military genius. It was months of starvation, disease, and the relentless desertion of allies who had been convinced by Octavian's propaganda campaign that following Antony meant following Cleopatra into un-Roman degeneracy. Octavian had systematically portrayed Cleopatra as an evil foreign seductress who had bewitched two of Rome's greatest generals. He declared war not on Antony, his Roman colleague, but on Cleopatra alone, framing the conflict as a defense of Roman civilization against an Eastern queen who planned to move the capital to Alexandria. It was one of history's most effective propaganda operations, and it worked. But what if it hadn't? What if the disease had been less severe, the desertions slower, the propaganda less effective? What if Cleopatra's battle plan had held together, Octavian's fleet had been broken, and the woman who had outlasted Julius Caesar and seduced Mark Antony had won the last war of the Roman Republic? The first and most immediate consequence is that Octavian, young, fragile, and entirely dependent on military victory for his political survival, likely does not survive the aftermath. His enemies in Rome, who had only supported him because he was winning, would have turned on him within months. A scholar from the alternate history site put it bluntly: the defeat of Octavian leads to his eventual assassination at the hands of his political enemies, resulting in yet another civil war that ends Roman dominance of the ancient world centuries earlier than it actually fell. But here is where it gets interesting, because the world that emerges from a Cleopatra victory is not simply a world without Rome. It is a world centered on Alexandria. Cleopatra's Egypt was extraordinary. Alexandria was, at that moment, the intellectual capital of the world. The Library of Alexandria, the greatest repository of human knowledge in the ancient world, containing hundreds of thousands of scrolls, covering everything from mathematics to medicine to astronomy to philosophy, stood at the heart of the city. The Lighthouse of Alexandria was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The city's scholars had calculated the circumference of the earth, laid the foundations of geometry and calculus, and were developing medical knowledge that would not be independently rediscovered in Europe for over 1,000 years. Cornell University ancient historian Barry Strauss, writing on the Battle of Actium, argued that had Antony and Cleopatra won, the empire's capital might have moved from Rome to Alexandria, and Latin might have become the empire's second language after Greek, which was spoken throughout the eastern Mediterranean. Think about what that means. The cultural gravity of the Mediterranean world shifts east. Instead of a Latin-speaking Roman Empire centered in Italy, spreading Latin law and Latin language westward into Gaul, Britain, Spain, and Germany, you have a Greek-speaking empire centered in Alexandria, spreading Hellenistic culture eastward and southward toward Persia, India, Arabia, and Africa. The linguistic map of the modern world is unrecognizable. French, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese, Romanian, all of them evolved from Latin carried westward by Roman legions and Roman governors. Without Rome as the dominant cultural force of the Mediterranean, none of those languages exist in the form they do today. The Romance languages spoken by over 1 billion people may never develop. Western Europe, never thoroughly Romanized, develops along different linguistic and cultural lines entirely. Now consider Cleopatra herself as a ruler of this empire. History has done her a profound injustice. The popular image, a beautiful seductress, defined by her relationships with powerful men, was largely created by Octavian's propaganda machine and repeated uncritically for 2,000 years. The real Cleopatra was something far more formidable. Modern historians emphasize that she was a stateswoman, a scholar, and one of the most intelligent rulers of the ancient world. She spoke 7 or 8 languages fluently. She was the first ruler of her dynasty to bother learning Egyptian, the language of the people she governed, rather than relying on interpreters. She was educated in philosophy, mathematics, chemistry, and astronomy. She had held Egypt together through a series of crisis, famine, civil war, and the relentless pressure of Roman expansion for 20 years. She was also, crucially, the mother of Caesarion, the son of Julius Caesar, the man whose assassination had started the civil war in the first place. A victorious Cleopatra would have had a legitimate heir with Roman blood, the son of Rome's greatest general, to place on the throne of whatever empire she built. In a world where Cleopatra's empire inherits the Hellenistic intellectual tradition, centered on Alexandria's extraordinary library and scholarly culture, the scientific revolution that took place in Europe in the 17th century might have happened much earlier. The Library of Alexandria in our timeline was damaged and eventually destroyed over several centuries of conflict, conquest, and neglect, its loss representing one of the great catastrophes of human intellectual history. In a world where Alexandria is the capital of a stable, powerful empire rather than a conquered province, the library survives. The knowledge it contained the works of Aristotle, Euclid, Archimedes, Eratosthenes, and hundreds of other thinkers whose work was lost forever, remains accessible, builds upon itself, and potentially accelerates human understanding by centuries. But there is a darker dimension to this alternate history that also demands honesty. Cleopatra's empire would have been built on the same foundations as every ancient empire: slavery, conquest, and the subordination of weaker peoples to the will of the powerful. The Roman Empire, for all its brutality, spread legal and administrative systems that created a degree of order and predictability across an enormous territory. An Egyptian-centered Hellenistic empire might have done the same, or might have fragmented quickly without the Roman military's extraordinary capacity for discipline and organization. And then there is the question of Christianity. Jesus of Nazareth was born in a Roman province, under Roman rule, and Christianity spread through Roman infrastructure, roads, legal tolerance, eventually imperial sponsorship. In a world without the Roman Empire as history knows it, the conditions that made Christianity a global religion change completely. A Hellenistic empire centered on Alexandria, religiously cosmopolitan and philosophically sophisticated, might have been far less receptive to a monotheistic faith that demanded exclusive allegiance. Christianity might have remained a minor sect in the Eastern Mediterranean. Islam, which emerged 6 centuries later, partly in reaction to the Christian world, might never have developed the same way either. The entire religious architecture of the modern world, 2 billion Christians, 2 billion Muslims, the shared Abrahamic tradition that links them, rests on a foundation that a Cleopatra victory at Actium might have removed entirely. Cleopatra died at 39. She had refused to be displayed in chains at Octavian's triumph, having reportedly said the words that became her epitaph, "I will not be triumphed over." It was the last decision of a woman who had spent her entire adult life refusing to accept the constraints the world tried to place on her. She nearly changed everything. She came within one battle, one afternoon on the Ionian Sea, of rewriting the next 2,000 years of human civilization. Would you want to live in Cleopatra's world instead of Rome's? Drop your answer below.